Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the April meeting of the Maryland Higher Education Commission. Nice to see everybody here. We do have a quorum with Commissioner Agu, Bands, Burnham, Howe, Thompson, and Williams in attendance, and I believe we are expecting more as the day goes on. We have a robust agenda, and I think we'll just kick it right off. If we could start, please, with a review of the minutes. I hope my fellow commissioners have had a chance to review the minutes. Any discussion, or is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the minutes with any necessary corrections.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye to approve the minutes. Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions or nays? All right, the ayes have it. Moving into the remarks, I just wanted to start off with very brief remarks. It has been almost a month since Elena Quiroz Lavanas has joined us as interim secretary, and she has really hit the ground running. She had to contend with the last 2 weeks of the legislative session, which she handled very well. And I've been meeting with her weekly. I'm very impressed with what she and her senior team, and in fact, everyone at MHEC is doing. I know we all look forward to hearing her remarks in just a moment, but just wanted to commend the new interim secretary and the full team for rallying around her. I also wanted to say Happy Administrative Professionals Day to the many administrative professionals at MHEC and frankly throughout state government. Having spent almost a decade in state government myself, I can tell you the administrative professionals are the ones who keep the place running. So to Ms. Nguyen and to all of those who aren't on the call today, thank you for all that you do. And we as commissioners really appreciate you keeping us straight and on task. And with that, I will turn it over to our interim secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and let me echo your gratitude to administrative professionals across our agency and across state government. As someone who started off as a receptionist actually at a SHIO agency, I know firsthand how critical that role is, and they have access to quite a bit of information. They are the face of the agency, and they engage directly with the public in ways that we don't often see. And so thank you so much for recognizing the hard work of our staff members in those roles. So good morning and buenos dias, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Agu, commissioners, and everyone joining us. I want to start my formal remarks this morning by thanking Governor Moore and Lieutenant Governor Miller for the opportunity to serve as Interim Secretary of Higher Education. This is a consequential moment for the agency coming right at the close of the legislative session, and I'm focused on ensuring we move forward with clarity, stability, and purpose. The Maryland General Assembly just concluded a historic session, and their partnership will be critical as we carry this work forward, particularly as we translate the session's investments and legislation into real outcomes for learners and institutions across the state. Madam Chair, your partnerships, our weekly coffees during this transition have been invaluable. Your availability, guidance, and steady leadership have made a real difference over the past few weeks. Gracias. Vice Chair Agu, your continued engagement, especially on the state plan, has been equally important as we shape the direction of our future. Thank you for your partnership. More broadly, this work depends on strong collaboration with our institutions, our interest holders, and colleagues across state government. Advancing post-secondary education in Maryland requires an all-of-government approach, and our colleges and universities serve as the anchor institutions driving socioeconomic mobility and community vitality across the state. For those of you who may not know me well, let me share a little bit about my background. I was born in Honduras and raised in Miami as a child of immigrants, and like many of the learners we serve, my path has been shaped by public policy and public education. I spent over a decade at the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education, where I left as Chief of Staff and Assistant Commissioner for Academic Policy and Student Success. Those experiences, both professional and personal, deeply inform my core operating principle: State policy must deliver tangible, life-changing outcomes for our post-secondary learners. It is not enough to simply expand access. We must ensure that those pathways drive educational attainment and result in true long-term socioeconomic mobility for every Marylander. Since stepping into this role just a little over 3 weeks ago, the focus has been on continuity and strategic direction. We have brought the senior team together around a clear 30-60-90 plan that is centered on 3 things: sustaining strong day-to-day operations, optimizing our internal capacity to better serve our learners, our institutions, and our state, and setting a definitive path forward on our shared goals. Just as important, we're being intentional about how we support and re-engage our staff during this transition. You'll see that reflected in today's meeting agenda. Today, we will start with an update on the 2026-2030 Maryland State Plan for Higher Education, and we'll discuss emerging strategies informed by our statewide engagement and how we are aligning that vision with the administration's broader commitment to expanding access, improving completion, and accelerating socioeconomic mobility for all Marylanders. We will also review our data dashboards, which are an important step in strengthening how we use data to inform policymaking and increase transparency and accountability. From there, we will provide a series of fiscal and legislative updates following the close of session. But before we move into that agenda, I do want to take a personal moment to recognize the staff at MHEC. Team, this has been a demanding season of transition. What I have witnessed at MHEC is that we are resilient, collaborative, and laser focused on excellence for Maryland's post-secondary learners. It is that dedication that grounds us during this period of change and propels our continued progress. Gracias a ustedes. I'm deeply humbled by the opportunity to serve our great state. I am committed to this mission, and from my own lived experience, understand the transformative power of higher education. Kids from my neighborhood frankly don't often find themselves in governors' cabinets, and it is my mission to ensure that the pathways we build today guarantee that I am certainly not the last. It is an honor to partner with the commission that shares this deep commitment to public service and student success. I look forward to the collaboration ahead. Gracias, and Madam Chair, I turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, Interim Secretary Quiroz Livanis, and we again are so grateful to you and to the whole team at MHEC for really stepping up. Next item on our agenda is the update on the state plan. So I know our vice chair has been the leader in that work along with you, Secretary Quiroz Livanis. So I turn it over to the two of you.
The interim secretary will start us off.
Thanks so much, Vice Chair Agu. And again, I want to reiterate my gratitude to the Vice Chair who serves as the co-chair of the State Plan Steering Committee. Just to ground us before I start the presentation, the State Plan Steering Committee met last week, and we've been convening a series of working groups that are tied to different goals in the state plan. I want to take a moment to also recognize the commissioners who have been joining our working group meetings. We've had several folks pop in and contribute to the conversation as well as complete the survey, and that engagement has been critical to informing the direction that we're headed in right now. So Vice Chair Agu, please feel free to stop me along the way, but we'll go ahead and just jump into the presentation. We always start with this slide as a reminder and to ground us in our statutory obligations related to the state plan. So we're required to talk about both present and future needs in education and research. We're also asked to talk about the capacity of individual institutions, segments, and systems to address those needs while simultaneously setting short-term and long-term objectives. This work would not be possible without a dedicated team of individuals at the agency, which include Drs. Emily Dow, Barbara Schmertz, and Ann Kellogg, who have been great colleagues in this work, as well as Ms. Alexandra Nguyen, as well as almost 30 members of the statewide steering committee, which represent different stakeholder groups as we've talked about, business and industry, community-based organizations, students, faculty, and administrators across our colleges and universities, both public and independent, as well as private career schools, have all helped inform this work. This slide should also look familiar. We have been working to define a vision. We set the guiding principles and establish the goals. We are now at the final stage of this roadmap where we are identifying strategies to make sure that we can actually deliver on the goals that we set forth in this plan. This has been an iterative process. So we first started convening the steering committee in July. They met monthly from July to December. And then in January, we transitioned to working groups, which started convening in February. And then the steering committee has met, like I mentioned earlier this month, and they will meet again next month to finalize the plan. The next series of slides are meant to show you just how different elements of the plan have evolved over time. So this was the vision statement that we started off in the fall, and we have since updated it to reflect a more comprehensive vision. Changes reflect a more accurate description of our governance here in the country, as well as making sure that we are paying attention to both economic competitiveness as well as societal and civic well-being. Both are necessary in order to make true of the objectives that we seek to put forward in the plan. The principles for policy making have remained mostly unchanged. The biggest difference that you'll notice is really with the first principle rather than center. We decided to use the word serve every learner. And that really speaks to, I think, the servant leadership that is actually on display within the steering committee and making sure that we all act in according to those principles. The other two principles remain the same, and these have been driving not only the goal setting process, but also the strategy conversation that we'll be getting to in just a minute. I'd offer that the biggest changes since we last met have been around the goals and the language that we use. And language is incredibly important. So initially we had 3 goals around increasing attainment, defining and delivering credentials of value, and fostering innovation and research. In December of 2025, that expanded a bit, or by December 2025, that had expanded a bit. And so we really wanted to frame the first goal around lifelong success and post-secondary attainment more broadly, recognizing that post-secondary learners don't just interact with our post-secondary education ecosystem once. Oftentimes they return for upskilling or reskilling. We also have adult learners that we hope to re-engage because we didn't necessarily support them through completion the first time that they entered into a post-secondary pathway. The second goal evolved to be ensure every degree and credential has value. This, I have to admit, the value language has been really interesting, and there's different ways that folks have perceived this, and because it's so, in many ways, it's less objective than other terms. We received quite a bit of feedback about using that terminology. And then mobilizing post-secondary education, innovation, and research for competitiveness and public good has also been a standalone goal that we've gotten some feedback on related to there are other parts of state government that are advancing this work. So how do we make sure that we are not doing this in isolation? The biggest example of that is through the Governor's Economic Competitiveness Subcabinet, of which MHEC is a member of. And they have 2 goals in a plan that they're developing, which is known as an Integrated Competitiveness Plan, which very much align with our goal 3. So what we have decided to do is update the goals to reflect the feedback that we've gotten from our steering committee and stakeholders. So the second goal is really about socioeconomic mobility and post-completion success. And so this language has resonated with our steering committee members, and so they are appreciative of the direction that we are heading in here. And then the third goal has been refined a bit to really make sure that we are talking about the post-secondary ecosystem as an asset in the state's economic competitiveness strategy. And again, the goal here under the Moore-Miller administration is to make sure that state agencies within the executive branch are working with one another, complementing each other's work, and not necessarily duplicating efforts. So this third goal here really is meant to speak to that whole of government approach in strengthening our state's economic competitiveness. And all of these goals continue to be in service of making sure that we leave no Marylander behind. Before I transition to talking a bit about the survey results, I do want to pause here to see if Vice Chair Agu, you have anything that you'd like to add.
No, I think in terms of the only thing I might say is just language has changed. I think potentially framing has changed. I think our goals are the same. We want to make sure that, and I'm looking at again our chair, that every student who starts a journey in higher education completes one, two, to make sure that when they do complete, that they are walking out with something that gets them to where they want to go. And then thirdly, that we think about not just the degrees. And again, it's something I've heard the governor say privately and publicly. Degrees and credentials are a huge part of what higher ed does. But we also have these other things that higher ed does that makes a huge difference to the state. We want to make sure that we're capturing that and using it to improve the life of every Marylander. So I think the goals are the same. I think what we heard was some really good feedback from our stakeholders. That's why we had that process, that everyone was at the table to offer that feedback. And the only other thing I'll say as we dive deeper is the response was almost universally positive when we put this in front of the steering committee, from the governor's office to people like Mary Kane at the chamber to a number of our institutions, as well as civil society stakeholders. Again, we did a pretty good job of getting everybody in the room, not perfect, but I think it's a big win of confidence to some of the changes that you saw. So just wanted to say all those things and happy to throw it back to the interim secretary to dive further.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Agu. And I will just open it up for commissioners in case there's any feedback that you want to relate to us regarding the reframing of the goals. Vice Chair Agu, right, in many ways, the goals remain the same, but we have greater clarity on how we can approach moving forward. Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, good morning. And thank you very much for going through the goals. On the very last slide, where you had the 3 points, what I am particularly happy about is that we're keeping the theme of collaboration important, particularly in that third goal. So I just want to commend the working group and both of you all for making sure that we have that as a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. It certainly helps that one of our principles that have been guiding this work was to champion collaboration and innovation. And because our steering committee is so diverse and has representatives like Vice Chair Agu mentioned, both inside and outside of the ecosystem, as well as from across state government, we've really been able to refine how we approach this work, again, in service of Marylanders. So appreciate that feedback. And I also take that as a charge to continue working with our colleagues across the state.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams.
Yes, good morning. And thank you, Madam Interim Secretary, for the review to this point. I appreciate the longitudinal view where things have shifted over the last, say, 12 months or so. That's really helpful. My question is, if you could sort of characterize for us the participation of the institutions in Maryland through this point. What sort of participation are you getting? Are you getting a good cross-section of publics, privates, community colleges, career tech schools, and so forth to ensure there's sort of comprehensive eyes on this as we get to the finish line in the next 60 days or so?
That's a great question. And thanks so much, Commissioner Williams. I would say yes, we have had a diverse group of folks. So just to kind of list them, we have community colleges that are represented in the group. We have University System of Maryland, the office, as well as USM institutions representing both regional, state comprehensives, and our research institutions. Morgan State University is also represented on the steering committee. We have various MCUA institutions that are represented either through their presidents or deans on their campuses. For example, we have both Loyola and Johns Hopkins represented on the steering committee. We also have private career schools on the steering committee, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention our K through 12 colleagues are also represented on the steering committee and the various working groups, in addition to those industry, philanthropy, community-based organizations, and others. I can tell you that their feedback in many ways, in addition to those who are critical partners, have very much informed the way that we are shaping this new language. And I'll give you an example. President Kurtinitis from one of our community colleges was really instrumental in helping us shape, as well as USM, in helping us shape the second goal related to the value proposition. Relatedly, USM, the research universities, and the community colleges help us reshape goal 3. And one of the ways that they did that is we had the Department of Commerce come and present twice on the integrated competitiveness plan, so we could determine how there is overlap and where it makes sense to more strongly couple the work versus duplicating the work. And so that has been really helpful as well, having folks from other executive branch agencies come and present on their state plans. And that way we can determine how best to leverage higher education as an asset as they work to advance those goals. And just on the Governor's Economic Competitiveness Subcabinet, they're the ones that are driving the integrated competitiveness plan. They have 2 goals that really nicely align with our goal 3. The first is around ensuring that we have a diverse talent pipeline that meets the workforce demands of the state. And this is really where community colleges, as well as universities and private career schools, contribute to that work. And then relatedly, there is a third goal. They have 5 goals. The third goal of theirs is related to leveraging research universities to really capitalize on research and development in the state. So that research to commercialization pipeline that we talked about last year is front and center in the Governor's Economic Competitiveness Subcabinet goal. So rather than listing almost like in the state plan and all of our sister agencies' state plans, how we fit into their goals, this reshaping is meant to do some of that work. But in short, yes, there's been quite a bit of institutional participation throughout the process.
Thank you so much. That's a tremendous amount of work, and it's only as good as the input and the consensus that we drive through it. So I recognize the tremendous amount of work. One final question to this point. I think you also have student input, right?
Correct. We have both. We have a current student, our student commissioner, Commissioner Otway, is serving on the steering committee. And then we have former student commissioners that have also served on the steering committee. So we're getting that graduate perspective as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. If there are no, here's Commissioner Otway. If we have no other questions, I'm happy to go over the survey results, as this is the primary vehicle in addition to the steering committee and working group conversations that's driving our strategic strategy framework. So all of our commissioners, as well as the steering committee, received a survey at the end of March focused on what are the strategies that are going to help us achieve the state plan goals. And so the next few slides cover some of those major, the results of those major questions, and I'm happy to provide the individual results to anyone who may have an interest in looking at that data. So we asked folks, what are the barriers to both attainment and completion? As a reminder, attainment is looking at the state and how many adults have a post-secondary credential that meet a certain earnings threshold. MHEC and our post-secondary institutions contribute greatly to attainment, but we're not necessarily the only ones who contribute to this metric. Obviously, there is a lot related to talent retention and talent recruitment when it comes to making sure that we have an educated citizenry. And then completion is really where we have been focusing most of our attention, as we feel like that is an area where our institutions have greater impact in making sure that more students who enter our post-secondary pathways are completing them, to Vice Chair Agu's earlier point. So the barriers that were identified around attainment, one was affordability, but that biggest barrier that most individuals identified was really the lack of alignment between education and workforce. So in many ways, what we've been thinking about as barriers are really opportunities. So I'm not even a half glass full, like my cup is always full. So while this is a barrier, it's definitely an opportunity for us to build a bridge between education and workforce. As far as completion, affordability and cost of attendance was identified as the biggest barrier there, along with alignment, again, with workforce. And there was some concerns. More than half of our participants did flag concerns related to academic preparation gaps. And I should note that this is not only, I think, a reflection of academic preparation gaps between K through 12 and higher education, but then how do you also support adult learners who are coming back to post-secondary who have been out of the classroom for a while? So that is definitely a multi-generational concern. We also asked then, how can we bridge the barriers? How can we bridge the gap and address the barriers that folks identified? So again, it's quite straightforward. Strengthen the alignment between post-secondary education and workforce. How do we build those bridges between our institutions and the employers that hire our graduates? Also important is expanding access to post-secondary education, making sure that it's affordable for Marylanders to pursue those pathways, as well as making the transitions from K through 12 to higher education more seamless. And you'll hear a little bit about direct admissions later in this presentation, as well as a bill that was passed by the General Assembly to conduct a study and also advance a policy in the coming years. And then advising was a critical element as well, making sure that we're supporting our high school counselors and giving them accurate information about the pathways that are available to students. We also asked respondents to help us identify who the most critical partners would be moving forward in this work. Commissioner Williams, in many ways, in service to your point of institution and then others. And so MSDE was a top partner that is listed, and it's wonderful that we have such an incredible leader and Superintendent Wright. I hear that she's the LeBron James of education, so we're lucky to have her in the state. And then respondents also identified statewide employers and industry partners, as well as the Department of Labor as key critical partners. And again, grateful that we have Secretary Wu leading DOL here in the state. We also talked about in the survey the need to support students holistically, so holistic student supports, and this goes back to MHEC won't be able to do this alone, and that's why it's called the Maryland State Plan for Higher Education and not MHEC State Plan for Higher Education. So in providing those top statewide interventions, folks identified increasing access to child's care, improving transportation access, and increasing access to mental health services will be critical. And so if we are to deliver on these, that'll definitely require an all-of-government approach and working with our sister agencies to provide those critical benefits to learners who are enrolled in post-secondary education. The survey also asked respondents to talk about what strategies they felt would advance student success. And so we identified strategies at both the state level and the institutional level. There's a lot more consensus on what the state should do. And I'm not surprised there. So more than 3/4 of respondents said that we need to expand need-based financial aid. You'll hear from Executive Director Al Dorset that that has definitely been the theme under the Moore Miller administration, and making sure that there is more funding going to the students who need it the most. And then going back to that previous slide around holistic student supports, making sure that we are incentivizing and investing in those supports at the state level. At the institutional level, strategies that were identified were implementing or scaling up the use of early alert systems and the leveraging data to support students through proactive advising, and then expanding flexible and accessible learning options, particularly for students who might be re-engaging in post-secondary education. We also asked, what data do our institutional partners and other colleagues need in order to advance and implement the state plan once it's adopted by the commission in June? And I thank Dr. Kellogg for her willingness to work with us. And I apologize for some of the text. It's weird here, which I guess is what's happened when you use Google Notebook LM. So my apologies. And I do want to make sure that I am recognizing that I am leveraging AI to support this work. We do not have staff at the agency to support us with our visualization. So very grateful that the Moore-Miller administration has allowed us to use tools like Google Notebook, Gemini, and others. But this is also a real-time example of like, make sure you triple check your work so that the words make sense on the slide. But you can see that folks want data on timely data on student prevention, on student progression. So looking at those momentum metrics, data linking, and this is really meant to say education and workforce. And then the final one is meant to say data on non-credit pathways, which we're calling professional certificates. And then turning to the final part of the survey, we asked, what could we do to advance post-completion success? And this is really what we're framing as social and economic mobility. And it's that pivot from the value conversation. So the top strategies, and there was quite a bit of consensus here, which was great and helpful to see. So strengthening those employer partnerships, again, key takeaway, how do we align post-secondary and workforce, support credit for prior learnings, and also expand. And expand could either mean modify existing programs to more cleanly align with existing demand of our workforce partners, or creating new academic programs where there is a need identified, perhaps using the workforce needs analysis that Dr. Dow presented on at the last commission meeting. There is also an interest to make sure that throughout the curriculum, we're embedding AI, career readiness, and durable skills. This AI piece is something that I also just want to spend a second on, given the governor's AI subcabinet and goal 3 that we just talked about, the reframing. AI is not something that should be limited to students who are in STEM or related fields. We've been having this conversation. How does an English major or a philosophy major or a psychology major or a political science major get trained in using AI in order to augment their abilities once they enter into the workforce? So that's just something that I want to take a second to double click on. And with that, let me turn it over to Vice Chair Agu before going over the proposed strategy framework.
Yeah, let me just say this one point on AI, which is everything that the interim secretary said, but also very candidly, and we see this in the data, we hear it from industry. Use of AI is becoming table stakes, meaning the way that none of us would hire someone who could not use Microsoft Office or Google Docs. AI is that now. It is very candidly, and so if we do not make sure that students are prepared for that, we put them at a disadvantage when they get out into the labor force, into the workforce. Similarly, and this goes to the leave no Marylander behind point. Candidly, this also gets to the beliefs we have about equity, because there will be students for whom the only place they may get this exposure is through their higher education experience. Whereas there'll be students who frankly come from more means who'll be able to get it through other ways. For students who have the talent, but they just don't have the means, this may be their one opportunity to get prepared for that. So that's why we are saying that here. So I want to say it's not simply about how do students get better. It's actually about how do students just simply keep up with the workforce and labor force as it's evolving in real time. Back to you, Madam Interim Secretary.
Thank you, Vice Chair Agu. Appreciate you further diving into that concept. Let me just postpone the request my laptop has for me to restart my computer, as now would not be a good time for that. Let's give it 8 hours. So now I want to transition to just talking a little bit about the proposed strategy framework. This is coming out of the survey results and is informed by the conversations we've been having with the steering committee. Just to preview next steps, we will be reviewing the strategy framework with our working group members. We actually have a working group meeting tomorrow, and then we'll be able to present a revised and final version ahead of final adoption in June. So there are 3 pillars in the strategy framework. In many ways, They support multiple goals, so they're not necessarily tied to a specific goal, but they support the goals as a whole. So for the first pillar, we're looking at access, readiness, and re-engagement. The first proposed strategy is around direct admissions for college-ready high school students. In many ways, this is also leveraging the fact that we are going to be required to do this by the General Assembly. We worked in partnership with the Maryland State Department of Education to provide amendments to that bill in order to make sure that we were putting down barriers between that transition from K through 12 to higher education. So excited to move that work forward in partnership with our MSDE colleagues. The survey also indicated that there is a desire to expand both early college and dual enrollment pathways in the state. In many ways, that aligns with the work that is being driven by the Blueprint for Maryland as well. The third strategy is around establishing flexible routes and targeted outreach to those adults that have some credit but no credential. There are hundreds of thousands of such individuals in the state of Maryland, and we have an opportunity to better serve them. And then finally, modernizing financial aid. As you know, we will be launching the new Maryland Student Information System later this year. And in addition to making that platform more user-friendly, we have to have a conversation about the 28, it used to be 27, but there are now 28 programs, which you'll hear more about, that all have different requirements, eligibility criteria, and ways to get verified, as well as different funding amounts. So if you're a first generation student, frankly, if you have a PhD, it can be quite difficult to navigate the landscape, and sometimes more is not necessarily better. For the second pillar, we're proposing looking at post-completion success and economic mobility. Here we want to leverage the work that Dr. Dow has been leading with the Aspen Institute and the Transfer Incentive. There is a meeting with the presidents this Friday, and that work continues to move in a positive direction. We also want to expand the way that we validate learning that happens outside of the classroom through credit for prior learning. And then ultimately, how do we embed career-connected experiential learning opportunities for all of our majors? Again, going to Vice Chair Agu's point, this is a matter of equity and making sure that our students have access to various forms of capital, as well as reimagining the undergraduate experience and making their learning more relevant as they transition into the workforce. The final proposed pillar is tied to advancing that whole of government strategy. And so again, fully mobilizing the post-secondary ecosystem by going back and looking at the Moore-Miller State Plan, as well as the key sub-cabinets. I mentioned the Governor's Economic Competitiveness Sub-Cabinet, the AI Sub-Cabinet, making sure that higher education is well represented and that we are coordinating our institutions. This means partnering with our sister agencies like Commerce and Labor to align the institutional output, like Vice Chair Agu alluded to, and like our governor has said, our schools do more than just produce degrees. And then finally, how do we supply that specialized human capital to ensure that we are meeting the demand in lighthouse and priority sectors that have been identified by our colleagues at the Department of Labor using their projections. So with this, I'll stop to get feedback from the commission and take any questions that you might have before jumping into next steps. Commissioner Williams.
Yeah, thank you again for reviewing this. It's great to see the progress on pillar 3. You can correct my thinking here, but my sense is on the first 2 pieces, those are table stakes about how MHEC operates. I mean, that's integral to, whole of government approach, and that's necessary to do all of that work. My take on this is the third piece is really the hardest work for MHEC and the institutions and our plan in higher education, and partnering with economic partners and private industry to supply that specialized human capital. And that's really to me the hardest piece of this, because I assume the first two pieces will sort of come naturally in terms of coordination among sister agencies and key internal partners. But that last piece is really key to our future, I think, for our economic growth within Maryland for the next decade and beyond. And you may be getting to this later, but I wonder if there's additional detail about how we were thinking about that third piece.
Sure, and thanks again for the question. So for the first two, I would say that they're becoming table stakes. That is not necessarily the culture in the state. And so like by putting it in the plan, we are naming how important it is to work with sister agencies. I think that's why, in many ways, if I go back to the first slide around the statutory requirements, when we look at academic and research needs of the state, traditionally, we focused on academic needs, but not necessarily research needs, research tied to research and development. So for us, we want to be pretty explicit about our willingness as an agency to engage in these conversations and make sure that we have, frankly, the capacity and the expertise to show up and coordinate that work in a meaningful way. But I agree that it should be considered a given in many ways, and that's the culture that we want to adopt moving forward. And frankly, I would hope an expectation that you have of us as an agency in this work. Related to the second, your second comment, third box, there's well, actually, let me spend one more minute on the second box before moving to the third. Part of the second box as well is related to aligning definitions. And I'll give you an example. So the Governor's Workforce Development Board just identified a series of policies and definitions that we need to adopt as they advance Workforce Pell. So we'll actually be getting a memo to you with an update on Workforce Pell in the next couple of weeks. But there are some, what I would offer are competing definitions, which could theoretically be complementary as far as defining in-demand fields, high-demand fields, emerging, as well as high wage. And so when I think about our role in supporting the institutions in academic program development, for example, we want to make sure that there is as close to a single source of truth around what directions our institutions should be going in as far as academic, new academic programs, the modification of academic programs, increasing capacity of academic programs. And that ties directly to number 3 on how we can then supply the specialized human capital to address the needs of the state. And I do want to flag that lighthouse and priority sectors are complementary terms. Education is a priority sector, right? That we need to know that we need to do better in addressing the educator shortage. That's not necessarily considered a lighthouse sector, but it is considered a priority sector for the state. So there is more work to be done in getting more concrete around what are some of those strategies. Frankly, we've done quite a bit in partnership with our sister agency, the Maryland State Department of Education, whether it's teaching fellows, which we all know is an oversubscribed financial aid program, to incentivizing and working with our institutions by leveraging our grant known as a Teacher Quality Diversity Program grant, to work with institutions to give them funding to create alternative pathways into the classroom, for example. So there's more that we need to do once we get agreement on these high-level pillars and the high-level strategies around what are the specific actions that can be taken. But in many ways, number 2 and 3 are interrelated. They need the data in order to understand how to provide that specialized human capital. And then we need to provide the incentives and the resources to allow institutions to do more of that work. Thank you. Vice Chair Agu.
Yeah, no, this is, I think the interim secretary said it. The only thing I'll add here is, and you'll hear about the next steps. For some of these bullets that you see across all these pillars, we are going to have some very specific actions named. Some which are table stakes, some which will be bold and ambitious. There will be some where we will have not necessarily an action, but a process, because they'll be there. So for example, that third bullet, and Commissioner Williams, you know this better than anyone based on your day job. No jurisdiction at scale has done number 3 in the United States. Therefore, this is hard. And so therefore, where we say, hey, we are going to create a process and hopefully an ambitious time frame to get us there. And so as you think about kind of what you'll begin to see, some of it will be very, very concrete, bold action that's very specific. There'll be a few that are frankly hard, because what we would not want to do is say a thing that either we don't know we can do or that we're not sure we can do, and where we'll commit to a process by which we will create that structure. Because when I look at number 3, no one, no city, no county, no state has been able to create the workforce that we need for these types of industries at scale repeatably. If you know it, please let me know. I said, because I have not seen it. And that's why we would want to commit to a process by which to get there. So you'll see that spectrum of actions when you see kind of the final draft that you all will look at and vote on. You'll see it hopefully in May. You'll vote on it in June. But I'll turn it back to the Secretary just to set expectations.
Yeah, if I may, I completely agree with that, Mr. Vice Chair, and that's the hard part of this. In looking at this, I would just assume that numbers 1 and 2 are happening, and that's just the way things should be and work. I know that's hard work, but in terms of a focus on innovation and competitiveness and really the meat of that third goal of the plan, this is the piece here that I think should require a lot of attention, in the next 60 days, but for the hard work for years to come.
Thank you, and agree. And in many ways, just to build off what Vice Chair Agu said, that third piece is being done in concert with other state agencies. So like going back to the governor's integrated competitiveness plan, where they're talking about how do you mobilize post-secondary education to advance research and development. We need to make sure that we're aligning with that subcabinet's strategies and informing the way that subcabinet thinks about post-secondary education in many ways. And to go to the second point that Vice Chair Agu made, but his first point initially is that this is going to be a living document. So there are some things where we are kind of putting a stake in the ground and saying it'll take us a year to develop a more concrete action plan. Some of that is related to data collection. There's some data that we will not have available until years 2 or 3, but we will be so much better off because of the work that MLDS is doing to make sure that we have access to good, reliable data, particularly around the mobility of our students in the state. If there are no further comments, I'll quickly summarize next steps before turning it back to the chair. We have, like I mentioned, we're continuing to review the strategy framework now. We're at that stage of the plan development. We'll convene the working groups 2 more times, once in April. There are 2 meetings scheduled between now and the end of the month, as well as another meeting in May where we'll have a chance to refine the strategy categories and get more specific about the actions necessary to bring this plan to completion. Vice Chair Agu, are there any final comments that you would like to make?
No, as I think you can hear, we're trying our best, number 1, to be ambitious, but also comprehensive and inclusive and collaborative. So trying to have just as many stakeholders to see this as possible, create feedback. And again, this is really going to come to you all in June. We really want you to, similarly, this is not a rubber stamp vote. We want to hear your feedback as well as you look at kind of that close to final draft. Similarly, we're going to make sure that if there's anyone that we've missed, that we also include them as well. But I believe we have a question or thought from Commissioner Burnham. So I'm happy to turn it over to you.
I just want to say thank you very much for the work that you're doing. I think you're providing great leadership. I really like the fact that you have included so many segments of the Maryland economy and society in doing this planning work. And I appreciate the degree to which you are seeking to make sure that the wording is right, so that people realize that all are included and that they grasp just what it is we're trying to do. I think you're doing a great job. So thank you.
I concur. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering about the civic well-being. I'm using those words directly from an earlier slide that you had, and how it will be operationalized as we reach the final plan. Of course, we can't answer that now, but I'm just wondering what type of thoughts are being given to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Commissioner Thompson. So there's two ways to answer it. And I'll start with one, just recognizing, and you're kind of getting at my point that some of the data will not be available in year one, but will be available at a later date. And so the way that we are currently conceptualizing of civic and community impact is looking at the mobility of our students and the socioeconomic mobility of our students. So what Dr. Kellogg is going to be able to do, and I know that she's online, and I won't be nearly as articulate as she is in describing this work, but what we'll be able to do, Ann, and you can keep me honest, is we're going to be leveraging something known as a geocoder tool. And so we'll be able to tell where students start their post-secondary pathways from. We'll look at the demographics and the characteristics of those neighborhoods, as well as the folks that live around them. And then we'll be able to see their trajectory. So what happens as they move through post-secondary pathways, and where do they ultimately end up once they earn that credential? Really getting at the mobility and the way that post-secondary education doesn't transform just an individual's lives, but then their families and their broader communities. So that is one way that we are thinking about it. The second way, and that's a longer term conversation, again, around like the data availability. The second way is really thinking about civic learning and engagement, and how we make sure that our students are graduating prepared to be active citizens in our society. And so measuring that, frankly, is a lot harder. Yes. I've been trying to do it for over a decade, and continue to be in conversations with folks like the Coalition for Civic Learning and Democratic Engagement, the Multi-State Collaborative, and others. And so that's an interesting place for us to be in, is knowing that we want to do something, but not necessarily having a mechanism to measure that. We don't believe that civic learning and engagement is something that can be done in a US history or a course on the Constitution. It's much deeper than that. So that's another place where we want to put a stake in the ground, but we know that we're going to have to continue that conversation with our partners and stakeholders over the course of the plan. Dr. Kellogg, is there anything that you want to add about the latest thinking? I got it right. Okay. I've been paying attention, and I've just been so impressed also with the work. I'll use this opportunity to say we would not be able to do that if it wasn't for Dr. Kellogg and the work of the Maryland Longitudinal Data System. The MLDSC is just an incredible resource to the state. So again, going back to that all of government approach, how do we make sure that we're leveraging the assets that are available to us? So that's how we're thinking about civic and societal well-being at the moment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
Wonderful. Any other questions or comments on this topic of the state plan? All right, let's go to our next agenda item, which is research and data dashboards. Is that Dr. Schmertz?
It sure is. And I just want to acknowledge Dr. Schmertz and her willingness to do this presentation. It's following the state plan presentation for many reasons, but mostly because we want to make sure that as we're talking about tracking progress, looking at the objectives, how do we make sure that we're actually going to achieve the goals that we put forward? Using the data that we have available to us is going to be critically important. We also know that there's going to probably be a need for more and additional data, but you'll see just how much work Dr. Schwartz and her team do on behalf of the agency and the state with a small but mighty team of 4. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Dr. Schwartz.
Thank you. And I'm going to dive right into my slide deck. I want to get a confirmation that people can see my slides. Yes?
We can, and I am eagerly anticipating this part of the presentation. And I know a lot of this is, probably all of it is publicly available. If you could just do it for dummies like me, like after the meeting, how can we go online and find these things and manipulate them? Because I plan to spend some of my afternoon doing that. All right, I will leave it to you. Thank you.
Now, am I showing the slides as in presentation mode or with my slides on the side? Okay.
Yeah,
So
on the
thank you
side.
on this side.
Side.
How about
Yeah.
now?
Yes, better.
Okay. All right. I am happy to walk you through Chair Motz. I'm going to do some table setting so that you have a framework when you do access these phenomenal tools. Not only what's behind them, but a bit about the cycle of what you can expect and how we can make these predictable and usable tools for all of you. But yes, so this presentation is a brief 10 slides. There's a lot in here. It's chock full of good information. We end with sort of a demo, and I have asked for assistance from a colleague to, at the right time, so you don't start playing around too early with the fun tool, embedding the link for the dashboard that we're going to walk through. But I want to show you how you could get to it. So we're not going to land right in the dashboard. So I think I'll be able to meet your needs. So thank you all for letting me have a few minutes of your time today. Having listened to Interim Secretary Quiroz Lavana's presentation, I do think that it is well-timed to embed this with your mind fresh with where we're going to be going with the state plan. So in a few short slides, as I indicated, I'm going to give you a sense of who we are. The data ecosystem. I've been in state plan meetings in which there's been questions asked about the data that the Maryland Higher Education Commission has, that the data that we hand over to the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center. So I think I'm going to give you a bit of sense, and I do not expect people to know a lot of data wonkiness to get through that. And then I'm going to land with some tools that we built. So I am situated within the office of, I'm situated within the academic affairs branch of the agency. I sit at the Office of Research and Policy Analysis. You've already heard mentioned, my phenomenal colleague, Dr. Ann Kellogg, is my co-conspirator on all things that are awesome about the state of Maryland and the data that we have. She sits half-time with the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center, and she sits half-time with us. It's a mighty job, and it's been phenomenal to work with her. Dr. Lynn, whom you've met through some of the mandated reporting that gets presented, is our associate director. She has now been with the agency, I believe, over 5 years, and really leads a lot of the analytic work that we do, especially some of our quasi-experimental and causal work. And then our analysts, Francis and Eliza, are the heartbeat of our unit in building the dashboards and really leading the team and becoming intimate with it. We have a great team of experts. So our mission is to help stakeholders throughout the state make data-driven decisions. We transform very complex data systems into accessible tools, and we are trying to keep our finger on the pulse of policies that are coming out of both state discourse, co-collaborative agency discourse, campus discourse, and of course the federal landscape. We have a number of stakeholders. It's important to think about that our focus is to provide tools for certainly any user who wants to consume our data, but our audiences often are state lawmakers, institutions, the governor's office. So while we are forward-facing, we do not engage directly necessarily with students, and we have not built tools that are always necessarily as helpful as, say, the college scorecard in really unpacking higher education in the state. We are very, very, very rigorous in our work, and we work very hard to meet all deadlines. We really try to be responsive, and we try to get ahead of that by making collaborative tools. So often people hear data and their eyes glaze over, or they hear the word data and they think we have all the data. And I think this Venn diagram kind of gives you a sense. You'll see that we are situated sort of in the middle of the diagram, but we are not current repository of the agency's data. We do not have visibility into budget or HR. We similarly do not have visibility day to day into the data of MD-CAPS, although we do get some institutional financial aid data. We, and so you can see the Venn diagrams, we sort of touch people. We certainly support overall agency operations through sort of the enrollment projections, which is a fiscal and capital decision, as well as we, of course, support the academic affairs unit through a lot of our academic data. And you'll see through the collections that we have why we are so integrated into the academic affairs side by providing things tied to the academic program inventory and program approval process. So the flow is very complex. This tries to simplify it in some ways, but it starts with the institutions, and it starts with the institutions in partnership with clear data definitions and tremendous data governance and oversight that actually the agency employs. We are coordinating body, so we do not really make a lot of data decisions by fiat, but instead through discourse with our campuses, and of course, keeping our finger on the pulse of the legislature and what they're looking for and trying to get ahead of that. But the institutions feed us the data, and they are cycled throughout the year. So you will see again a time frame of when we get the data and how we work with it. Our IT department at the agency actually receives all of it. At that point, it is a row per student, say, with some personal information in it, and that data is all stripped, and we are not given that data, so we have no idea about the identity of anybody. And there's a long cycle of validation and release. And the idea is that we will not publish a number that we have not verified and validated. We are really, really committed to high quality data. We analyze that data. So the IT department provides it to us in storage and SQL tables, and we access that data and we produce a number of products. We, of course, are central to our mission is producing mandates, but we also enjoy the work that we're able to do to inform things like the KPIs, managing for results, ad hoc reports, and research, as well as the dashboards. And our work, as I've mentioned before, is often disseminated to various populations that can benefit from our work. So this just gives you a sense of what I've covered already, which is that these concentric circles that touch each other really are the bread and butter of what we do. We go through cycles. We were at the ready throughout legislative session. We are at the ready, a little weary, but at the ready to act on what came out of session. We bring before you mandated reports. We do analysis as needed, and then we have our portfolio of work. So this very colorful diagram gives you a sense of the inputs. If you recall from that flow chart, we get a lot of data. We get them throughout the year. So the left-hand side of this is the beginning of a fiscal year, the month of August. And you can see that we have a number of collections. These are actually all the collections that we get. They come at different times of the year. And the lighter color is of any one of those bands is sort of the yin and yang, the give and take between the IT office and the agent and the institutions to get the data right the first time. Then there's even more rigorous validation performed by Dr. Kellogg, as well as members of my team on sort of the sense making of the data. Those data are not released to the research unit until all of those sniff tests have been passed and certain date points have been passed. So for example, we get degree data into the agency in August and September. But it is not released into my office until December because of the rigor by which we check that data and make sure that it is of high quality. Some of our collections are term-based, such as the enrollment data. Others are calendar-based. We get course level data, which is literally a course per person, per course enrolled, which is a lot of data. Think about your college experience and the 5 classes you took per term for the 4 years you were in it. That's a lot of data. Those data then cycle through to materials we release. This is just a highlight of the materials we release through the dashboards, because the focus of this talk is the dashboards. But we also are tied to mandated reporting and other things we generate as a standard business practice for our institutions to rely on for things like their performance accountability metrics, their own reporting. We have some mandates that come out of this. But as you can see, just like the diagram before showed that we have data coming throughout the year, we also have products coming out. And as I said, because our data are so high quality, we feel very comfortable with the work that we produce and the data that we publish. The good news too is that the dashboards all have downloadable data. So individuals can not only engage with our dashboards, but they can access the data themselves and manipulate it as they see fit. This just gives you a sense of the size and scope. So as I said, we have all of this data. These are millions and millions of records that we are playing with within a SQL data system that is highly secure. I cannot get into, I don't know the nature of that. That really sits very much with our data governance and IT team. And our former recently retired director of IT sat centrally in a kind of statewide conversation around data security and data, all of the risks that come to the data. But when we are handed the data that we work with, it is de-identified, and it is large and complex. A team of 4 provides the analysis on this work, and I will actually say it's really a team of 3, because while I am the director of research and policy analysis, I am rarely into the millions of records trying to perform the queries that my team do. So at this point, I am going to go ahead and walk you through how to access some of our dashboards. And then this will really be the wrapping up. I'm going to highlight some of the other materials we have, but then I will open it up for questions. So I believe you all now can see my landing page. So this is to what Chair Motz indicated. We are within the agency's nest of 6 squares. If you were to go to the main page, we are our own square. And when you land on Office of Research and Policy Analysis page, you see our team. We do a nice job of actually telling you about some of the things that we just published. So we have a highlight here regarding the workforce training registration dashboard, which is enrollments in workforce training programs. And then we have some of our policy briefs. And these various boxes here just expand and collapse with materials on mandated reports. This is sort of a succinct way. But where we're going to go is to interactive data dashboards, which is its own submenu here, as well as the policy briefs. And so I'm actually going to briefly take you to the policy briefs because I'm not going to be highlighting it much more. But this is where our proactive work that we have generated lies. So we've recently done a study on mathematics reform that found that the mathematics reform is working at Maryland's community colleges when implemented with fidelity. And we also did some work with credit loss and excess credit as students transfer between the community colleges and the public 4 years. So there's some really exciting work here. And the nice thing is we do a brief executive summary, a 1-pager, as well as a more in-depth report that really gets into the methods. We have other work on transfer and remediation. So it's a rich repository, and we will continue to add to this as we help support the state's agenda. But on to the interactive dashboard. So I believe my very lovely colleague, Dr. Dow, has inserted a link. So every one of our dashboards is listed here in alphabetical order, and there's information regarding when it was last updated. Sometimes we have, perhaps we find a typographical error, or we realize that we have additional data to add. So we'll update the data so that people can see when it's been most recently updated. We're going to enter this academic momentum dashboard. So the exciting thing about the academic momentum dashboard, it feeds directly into some of what we're talking about with the state plan. These are a dashboard filled with early signals of student success regarding first math, first English, as well as their retention from term to term, their retention from fall to spring, etc. And so all that it happens in every one of our dashboards is there is a kind of explanation of the dashboard in the first page, a little bit of a how-to so that individuals who may feel they're not quite sure how the visuals work. This is rather dense, but we've tried to make it so that it's readable on kind of how to use the dashboard, and that's a standard practice. And then we have a table of contents, and they're hyperlinked so that you could go to exactly where you want to, as well as the downloadable data, which is truly a landing page where you download the data into Excel. So you don't need any special software in order to get the data. We do a lot with technical notes. This is sort of the wonkiness of our work, where we're really clear about who's in our dashboard, what limitations we may have the data, the decisions we've made, as well as sort of straightforward definitions, because we don't expect everybody to understand the language as we do. So there's a lot on this tab. The beauty of this one in particular is that these gray buttons here allow you to find out the story about students in their first term, their first year, and their second year, as well as interacting with things such as the average credits and the percentage credits. attempted and earned in the first year. When we switch from one dashboard to another or one button from another, we actually get other metrics. And the beauty of the filters is you get a trend line of data on, say, fall to spring retention and persistence. You get a key, who has persisted at any institution, who has been retained at the same institution, and you can see what is for statewide, and then you can bring to bear how is an institution doing in comparison to the state, as well as how are populations of students doing. So this allows, when a very succinct, kind of condensed dashboard, a lot of information. And as I said, anybody who is overwhelmed by it and wants to manipulate the data anyway can use the download feature. We move on to the second year and we get different measures, which is did they come back for a second fall? Again, those same formats exist. I can look at it this statewide. I compare it to an institution, and I can also compare by populations. And then I can see even farther. And this dashboard in particular is very central to answering a lot of the CCR-CCA policies that were implemented back in 2013 around early momentum and the findings and research, that if you can get students to really take on some of the momentum of credits, earning credits, completing credits that they attempt, and so forth. And you can see right here, again, back to that subject, you can look at average credits earned versus average credits attempted. This same dashboard exists for the public 4 years as well. And so you get the same concepts of how are institutions doing as a whole in the state, how is an institution doing in comparison to the state, and how are subpopulations doing within the state. So that is the dashboard in a nutshell. If we continue on, as I said, there's technical notes that allow you to both understand the definitions, any limitations in our data, and then finally, a landing page that just explains that these are downloadable data, and then you just click the button. And when you do, a file goes into your downloads box that's got the data. So I'm not going to launch, actually. I'm not going to launch my Excel. So we will end there. So I am, that concludes my very quick and hopefully effective tour of both who we are and what we produce, in particular, our data dashboards. So I do open it up for questions. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed a slide. Upcoming work. We are in the discussion phases of finishing up an issue brief on evidence-based teacher licensure exam practices. The Aspen transfer intensive dashboards are about to launch. We have received some money from NDRC to complete and perform a causal study of the impacts of that intervention, as well as refreshing our dashboards and performing our mandated reporting. And now I open it up for questions.
Wonderful. I really appreciate the demo. Any questions, fellow commissioners? Vice Chair Agu.
Thank you to the team for this. This is tremendous, particularly as we look at and compare to other states. One question I had was just on like academic research. So I'm curious. So I've seen in other states where they have kind of academics at times will want more than is publicly available to do kind of deeper academic research. I'm curious for you, with what you make public, is that still needed? And if it is still needed, if I'm an academic who wants to do research, what research authorities or pathways exist for folks to do that type of work?
That's a great question. So in fact, the math pathways analysis that we did was in co-collaboration with a faculty member from the University of Delaware. So there is, through our partnership with our AGE's office, a data sharing agreement and a process by which we hold ourselves and the researcher accountable to standards regarding access to the data. They do not have access to any PII that we do not. They do not get a file with names.
Yes.
There are rigorous practices around the management and destruction of that data that they are held to. So we are successfully partnering with, we would not be able to do the work that we are able to do with just the team of 4 without building these relationships with faculty members. And Dr. Lynn has been central to that. Our work on transfer, the excess credits, was actually also with Wayne State. So we are in conversation all the time, and find this to be an exciting extension of really empowering the data. We do hold researchers accountable to making sure that their questions are of interest to the state of Maryland. You do not get to play with our data just for the sake of playing with our data. It has to really bring home a research question that matters to the agents, to the state.
This is super helpful. Thank you. I think I will always advocate for more capacity for this type of work because it is so important and allows us to know if we're getting closer or farther away to where we're trying to get to. In lieu of that, because I know we are in constrained times, I'll use that euphemism. It'll be innovative partnerships like that I think hopefully allow us to do more with less. So just thank you to Dr. Schmertz, you and your team, as well as to everyone who is part of this. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Great question. I have a question that's sort of the flip side for the lay person. I'm sure you've thought of this. Just curious, how are you getting the word out there in case people don't know to go to the MHEC website and click on such and such, like to your fellow agencies, just to, many of the stakeholders who you've engaged for the state plan? This is just such rich data, and I just want as many Marylanders as possible to be using it.
That's a great question. We try a number of different, so one of the things I think we're blind to is what our traffic is already like. I mean, we can do clicks and the sort of analytics that happen with a page, but we put work out there in good faith, and we are hoping it's not just self-referential and that the same 14 people aren't coming back to our dashboards and that there aren't more people. It lies really in partnership with the institutions themselves. They are central to letting other partners know of this tool. We certainly try to highlight it to the governor's office. We often reference it. I do have traditionally met with the Department of Legislative Services analysts well before the session begins. So a Sarah Baker or a Carolyn Boyce to both share with them. In fact, this academic momentum dashboard was used in the analysis for one of the hearings this year. So we do get some sense that our tools are but that is in part in response to the discourse we have with people who are using our work. As to new audiences, I see that Chip has raised his hand. I think where we're partnering with the communications team is to try to figure out how to get that word out more consistently. So I'll let Chip answer as well.
Mr. Brown?
Thanks, Dr. Schmertz. Thanks, Cassie. Good morning, everyone. So yes, we are building a series of plans, and one should be designed around this tool. It's an amazing tool. Unfortunately, I'm slowly getting to use it and know it. I touched it for the first time maybe a week ago, but we can do some very targeted, I think, outreach to partners, people that need this information, people that want this type of information but don't know how to get it easily. And so I will be working with Dr. Schmertz on some targeted outreach, and so then we'll grow it out from there. But I have a very small team here, so we'll get to it.
Thanks, Mr. Brown. And before we get to Commissioner Thompson, I'm not sure all of the commissioners know you yet because I recently met you. Do you mind just introducing yourself, your role, your background, just 30 seconds so we can get to know you a little bit?
Sure, really quickly. So you'll see my name is Ruffin Brown, but I've been called Chip since before I was called Ruffin. From Baton Rouge, Louisiana, went to LSU, go Tigers. Military background, been working in and out of politics since 1995. Have 5 children ranging from ages 37 down to 14. Worked on Capitol Hill, worked in City Hall here in Baltimore City, worked in second floor for a while. Let's see, what else? Worked in comms a lot, did some organizational development work, NEKC, various places I've been, and I'm excited to be here. There's a lot of work to be done, and I'm so excited because we have so many good things like the data dashboard, the state plan, just the new MD SIS. So 30 seconds, I'm done.
And sorry, and just your official title.
Oh, I am the new Director of Communications for the Maryland Higher Education Commission.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
Great.
Chair.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, thank you, and welcome, Mr. Brown. And Dr. Smerts, thank you so much to you and your team for the great updates and the presentation. One question that I had regarding the highlight areas, is it the brief, the one of the slides you indicated?
Mhm.
What is that section called again? The briefing.
Oh, here, let me,
Thank you. I don't want to misname it.
right,
Issue
so,
brief or issue briefs.
right, so if you go here, we're gonna start from the beginning. Look at this.
Okay.
Here we are at the MHIC page. You scroll down to this research and publications and dashboard. So who was the guy in the middle of Hollywood Squares? Was that Paul Lind? Is that dating me? Anyway, we're right in the middle of the checklist.
Yes.
And you have our research and policy analysis reporting. You can go directly to our data dashboards, or we have these policy and issue briefs.
Yes. Now, how do you determine what gets highlighted at particular times regarding those policy briefs?
That's a great question. That has been, I will say that among state higher education authorities, we are a bit more innovative than some in this sort of proactive, quasi-experimental work with faculty members. It's sort of a kind of a direction we've gone. The subjects have been always approved by senior leadership and have been emergent. So, for example, the evaluation of this mathematics reform was really a request made by USM leadership years ago when the program was project was first implemented, because it was felt that we needed to understand the effects of these significant changes to the campus. So that emerged from conversations Dr. Dow had with then Nancy Shapiro, and it sort of bridged over into the leadership that's there at USM now. So they're sometimes emergent. The credit loss was very much a scholar coming to us to say, how can I help with the Transfer with Success Act implementation? How can I help you understand whether it's having the effect that it has? And so this piece on the access credits is part of a larger multi-year initiative this scholar has. I would imagine the state plan will really shape our research agenda. And so instead of sort of being open for business, we will do a little bit more of, here are menus of things that are our priorities,
Yes.
and how would you like to support our work? And so we anticipate that as the state plan emerges, it probably will be, you would be unaffected by the change, but the tenor by which we engage with individuals and kind of get that menu of work up will shift internally. And so as you see more things come on this page, it could very well be, and we may even make it clear, this is tied to goal 1 of the Maryland State Plan in these following ways. Right?
Great. That's exciting. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Schmertz, and to your whole team. And I believe Dr. Lind was just out on maternity leave, so I hope she's doing well.
She is. She is on family leave, and she is due back at the end of June. She had a baby boy, and she has mostly left us alone. We did get a chance to have some FaceTime with her, and she did indicate she misses thinking in the kinds of ways that that work allows you to think. But she is doing very well, and I will be sure to let her know that you've asked about her. But thank you again for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. I really appreciate it.
Yes, I'm
It's such an honor.
excited to dive in, and I'm sure others are too. Well, let's move along to our next agenda item, which is legislative updates. Ms. Music, I assume, will be presenting.
She will be, and let me jump in, Madam Chair, and also just extend my gratitude to Dr. Schmertz. It's quite an exciting time. And to Vice Chair Agu's point, like, we are open for business and partnership with folks outside of the enterprise, which is critical to advancing this work. That's not always the case at SHIOs across the country. So I applaud Dr. Schmertz for her willingness to think creatively in that way. What we've done for the next part of the agenda is there's a slight update. We've coupled the fiscal and legislative updates together. So we'll have members of the team present in just a moment. As you know, this recent legislative session proved that the Moore-Miller administration remains deeply committed to post-secondary success. Even amid the broader constraints that were just referenced, MHEC's operating budget increased slightly to $860.1 million. More importantly, our direct investment in Marylanders continues to surge, and you'll see some of that reflected in the base financial aid. Translating these historic investments into real-world outcomes requires shared ownership. And so true progress, we believe, happens when we empower on-the-ground experts here at the agency to help steer operation and direction. To that end, I'm incredibly proud to yield the floor to the dedicated teams who successfully navigated this year's legislative session. So you'll hear from the Office of Finance and Administration. Our new Assistant Secretary for Finance and Administration, Dominic Ayonta, has been with us, I think, for less than 5 weeks. So we're incredibly happy to have him on the team. You'll also hear from his colleagues that serve as analysts and the budget director, as well as our executive director from the Office of Student Financial Assistance and the executive director of the Office of External and Legislative Affairs, representing how the agency is coming together in support of the work that came out of this year's session. So with that, let me turn it over to the team. And again, thank you to commissioners for allowing us to slightly rearrange the agenda items.
Thank you, Madam Interim Secretary. Good morning, everyone. Can everybody see my screen okay? Okay. Today, the Offices of Finance and Administration and External and Legislative Affairs, as well as OSPA, are partnering to provide the Commission with our budget and legislative updates for fiscal year 2027. The roadmap for today, our briefing moves from a high-level view of statewide funding for all institutions into the specifics of MHEC's own operating budget. We'll then provide deep dives and critical updates on financial aid programs, the capital budget, and the final outcomes of the 2026 legislative session. Our agency's work is driven by a specialized team of subject matter experts, or SMEs. In finance and administration, this group includes dedicated and talented leads and their teams across finance policy, budget and accounting, IT, operations, and student loan debt relief, respectively. Also want to take this time to recognize our outstanding OSPA team led by Executive Director Al Dorsett. This team serves as the primary gateway for student access in Maryland, administering over $221 million in state-funded grants, scholarships, and loan repayment programs. They manage a complex portfolio of over 25 distinct programs, ranging from the massive Educational Excellence Awards, which make up over 62% of our aid distribution, the highly specialized workforce and career-based grants. Their work obviously isn't just about processing applications. It's about ensuring that 88% of MHEC's total budget reaches the students and families who need it most to navigate the rising costs of higher ed. Also want to acknowledge the outstanding team handling our external relations, communications, and legislative tracking, led by Executive Director Megan Music and our fantastic new Communications Director, Chip Brown. This team is vital in communicating MHEC's mission and managing our day-to-day relationships with the General Assembly, the Governor's Office, and many of our stakeholders. And now I'd like to hand it over to Megan for an overview of the Maryland session and budget cycle. Thank you.
Good morning and thank you. So this slide right here is providing a high-level overview of how Maryland's legislative session and budget cycle operate and where MHEC fits into both. So on the left side, you'll see that each year the Maryland General Assembly convenes for a 90-day session. This begins in January. And during this time, our senators and delegates are responsible for 3 functions. This includes passing legislation, adopting the state balanced budget, and conducting oversight of state agencies like MHEC. From our perspective, this is where policy decisions are made that directly impact higher education. This is both operationally and financially. Session concludes with sine die in April, and this is when you have the high volume of period where remaining legislators are trying to finalize and pass them. Running parallel with this, with its own cadence, is the state budget process. This is one of the most significant drivers of MHEC's work during session. This process does begin with the governor's proposed budget. It's developed during the interim and introduced at the start of session. Then from about late January to mid-March, MHEC is actively participating in budget hearings before the appropriations and budget and tax committees. This is where we are presenting, defending, and providing context on our funding and programs. Committees are then making key decisions. This is including funding adjustments, budget language, joint chairman report requirements, and these often carry additional oversight or reporting expectations. For example, budget language was added this session to add a position within MHEC for an HBCU liaison. Finally, decisions then move from each chamber to full votes before the budget is finalized. This legislative session, the budget did originate in the Senate, then move to the House for final passage. Understanding this structure is critical because it does frame how MHEC engages during the legislative session, from shaping policy to managing budget impacts and responding to our legislative and reporting requirements. I'm going to pass it back over now to our finance and administration team.
Thank you, Megan. To ground us in the numbers, this chart illustrates the total $3.5 billion in state funds supporting higher education for fiscal year 2027. As you can see, the university system in Maryland receives 67% of these funds, followed by community colleges at 16% and student financial assistance at 7%, respectively. For the budget overview, as you can see, the governor's proposed budget provided MHEC with $860.1 million. This constitutes a $15.4 million or 2% increase from FY 2026 enacted levels. To maintain a balanced budget, the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, or BRFA, reduced MHEC's operating budget by $31.8 million. Those $31.8 million in reductions included $21 million from the CADE grant, $4.5 million from the Sellinger grant, and the remaining reductions were comprised of $6.3 million in funds from state grants and financial aid, respectively. This slide also delineates the $860.1 million final enacted budget. And I'm sorry, these funds also provide for $130K, as Megan mentioned already, for MHEC's first ever HBCU liaison, which is also a critical point to highlight again. Lastly, as far as leanness of operations go, we wanted to highlight that MHEC remains an exceptionally lean agency insofar as only 2% of our budget is allocated for administration and overhead. This 2% footprint ensures that the remaining 98% of our funds wholly flow directly to institutions and students to support higher education in Maryland. With that, I'll hand it over to our Budget and Administration Director, Sam, for an overview of the operating budget. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. The Maryland Higher Education Commission has received a total appropriation of $860 million for its fiscal year 2027 operating budget, after adjustments for Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act reductions totaling $31.8 million. This represents a 2% increase, $12.5 million, over the fiscal year 2026 appropriation of $847.6 million, reflecting Maryland's continued dedication to investing in higher education while addressing fiscal challenges. The administration budget grew to $14.5 million, up from $12.7 million the prior year, enabling MHEC to strengthen internal operations and administrative support. The largest portion of the fiscal year 2027 budget, 63%, continues to support Maryland's community colleges and non-public institutions through grant funding mechanisms such as CATE funding formula and Salinger program. Despite reduction under BRFA, these funds remain vital for enhancing academic programming, upgrading infrastructure, and sustaining educational innovation. Scholarship programs account for 25% of the total budget, reflecting a sustained commitment to student financial support. Key scholarship initiatives include delegate and senatorial scholarships, Conroy and Crayer Memorial Scholarship, and Maryland Promise Scholarship. Teachers' retirement and optional retirement contribution represent 9% of the budget, maintaining commitment to Maryland's educator workforce. The Loan Assistant Repayment Program accounts for 1% of the total budget, helping to ease the debt burden for graduates in high-need service areas. Finally, administrative operations comprise 2% of the total budget, covering essential functions such as personnel, IT systems, and general oversight. MHEC remains committed to maximizing its impact of every dollar. In fiscal year 2027, the Commission continues to seek operational efficiencies while upholding its mission of supporting accessible, affordable, and high-quality post-secondary education for all Marylanders. Before I pass it over to the Executive Director of Student Financial Aid, Al Dorsett, if there is any questions. Thank you. I pass out Al Dorsett.
Thank you. Good almost afternoon. And hello, Interim Secretary Corrales-Tavares, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. This section transitions from the broader operating budget to a focused review of student financial aid funding administered through the Office of Student Financial Assistance. These slides compare FY 2027 anticipated funding levels against FY 2026 working amounts. The data reflects grants, scholarships, and loan assistant repayment programs supporting Maryland students. The purpose is to show how resources are aligned to affordability, access, and workforce priorities. A key takeaway from this is financial aid remains a central investment strategy within Maryland higher education funding. Next slide, please. Total anticipated FY 2027 financial aid funding is $221.8 million. This represents a modest increase of approximately $300,000 over the FY 26 working budget. Adjustments totaling $4 million were absorbed while preserving overall financial portfolio stability. And despite fiscal constraints, Maryland maintains its focus on the financial aid commitments. Next slide, please. A breakdown by unit. Our need-based aid remains the largest category in the portfolio. Educational Excellence Awards remain level funded at $138.7 million. The 2+2 Transfer Scholarship remains stable at $2.3 million. These programs continue supporting low-income students in transfer pathways. Next slide, please. Career-based programs address workforce shortages and public service needs. Teaching Fellows for Maryland increases back to $18 million as guided within statute. Teacher Development and Retention remains funded at $10 million. Police Officer Scholarship is reduced to $500,000. And other programs, including cybersecurity and workforce shortage grants, remain stable. Next slide, please. This category includes legislative mandated and population-specific scholarship programs. Senatorial and delegate scholarships receive formula-driven increases. Conway and Crier, veterans, and Tolbert programs remain level funded. During this 2026 legislative session, statutory updates to the Conway and Crier program provided the commission additional flexibility to establish an allocation methodology to improve administrative efficiency and fund management moving forward. That will be presented in the upcoming commission meetings. These programs continue to meet statutory commitments and targeted student needs. Next slide, please. Centralized programs range from need-based to career-based awards, with funds provided directly to institutions for awarding to eligible students. These programs give institutions flexible aid tools to meet campus needs. Maryland Community College Promise Scholarship is reduced down to $12.5 million. Graduate and Professional Part-Time Grant and Workforce Development Sequence Scholarship remains level funded. These programs support adult learners, part-time students, and community college access. Along with the campus-based EAG program that is not in here, but that is $2 million given to institutions from the $138 million identified for the Howard B. Rollins program. Next slide, please. Repayment programs help recruit and retain professionals in public service sectors. Janet L. Hoffman LART remains level funded at $4.12 million. Foster care recipients LART remains stable at $100,000. Police officers LART was reduced to $500,000. Next slide, please. Overall, need-based aid remains the largest category at approximately $153.5 million. Career-based programs increase to $33.1 million. Loan repayment declines to $4.7 million. Total funding remains stable at $221.8 million, or $221.8. Yeah, that is correct. Sorry about that. Next slide, please. This visual shows how the $221.8 million portfolio is distributed across program categories. Most funding is concentrated, as indicated, in need-based programs, particularly EEA. Smaller segments support workforce priorities, legislative commitments, and repayment incentives. The chart demonstrates both scale and diversification. Next slide, please. Since FY 2021, Maryland's financial aid portfolio has grown from approximately $157 million to more than $221 million. This reflects growth of more than 40% over the period. The expansion demonstrates sustained investment in affordability and workforce priorities. As you see, FY 21 and 22, prior to the Moore Miller administration, was kind of stagnant, but as of FY 23, since the Moore and Miller administration, you've seen a growth in overall aid. The growth also increases administrative and forecasting complexity. Next slide, please. EEA is the largest single driver of aid portfolio growth. Funding increased from $82.4 million in FY 2021 to $138.7 million in FY 27. EEA now represents more than 60% of total aid portfolio. This reflects Maryland's strong commitment to broad need-based assistance. Concentration in one program also creates budget sensitivity tied to demand. Next slide, please. Over the last 5 years, Maryland has created or expanded multiple aid programs. Examples include police scholarships, cybersecurity scholarships, teaching fellows, and teacher retention incentives. Legacy programs have also seen eligibility and operational updates. These changes respond to workforce needs and access priorities. Next slide, please. This slide highlights how fiscal pressures require target reductions and funding shifts. Police scholarship and LART programs were significantly reduced due to low utilization. Promise scholarship funding was adjusted based off spending trends. Some programs remain supported through fund source swaps rather than new general funds. Existing recipients continue to be prioritized where programs were scaled back. And I will now open it up to questions before I pass it over to my colleague, Dan Schuster.
Any questions? I have a question. Mr. Dorsett, thank you as always for being so responsive to the students of this state. I know you and your team have made great progress in starting to award some of the grants and scholarships that you mentioned. Can you just give this commission a brief high-level update of where you are this financial aid cycle in awarding?
Sure. To date, we have awarded a total of $74,832,750 across all EEA programs supporting 4,597 students, and we are still awarding even as this week. Subtracting these awards from the $136.6 million available budget with the CBA to $2 million, we still have $61.8 million remaining in funds. GA initials, the largest portion of award funds has gone to guaranteed access initial awards, with $40 million distributed to 2,222 students. GA renewals, the guaranteed access renewal awards make up the second largest category with $34,528,150 going to 2,304 students. Of course, that number is lower because we still have renewals in which credits need to be reported. We have already sent out communications, or our first initial amount of communications, to the institutions, reminding them to report credits as soon as possible. Then we have our next generation scholars. We've awarded $47,800 to 3 students for initial awards. And renewals, we've awarded $124,000 to 8 students for renewal awards. Again, renewal awards still waiting for students or schools to submit credits for students. Last EA renewal, currently $132,800 has been awarded to 60 EA renewal students. And again, with EA renewals, waiting for institutions to report credits, as most of those students have completed 2 or more years.
Well, congratulations to you and your team. It's a lot of work, and it's so meaningful to the students impacted. So meaningful. Commissioner Howe.
Thank you.
I just want to say that in looking at all these slides and numbers, it is almost beyond my comprehension how in the world you ever get to assemble all these numbers and have all these incredible numbers to share with us. So I compliment you and every single person who works on this. I mean, I really try to understand everything that you're saying, but it is really mind-boggling what you do, and I thank you for everything.
Thank you.
I think it's an excellent point. And imagine if you're a student trying to navigate this alone without a family member or an advisor. And one priority that I've had for a while now, I mean, frankly, when Governor Moore asked me to join this commission, financial aid sort of streamlining was a top priority of mine, and it remains a top priority of mine. So I'm hoping in the months and year to come that we get some momentum around streamlining the process and making it easier for students and families and counselors to navigate. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, you did a nice job of consolidating many of our agenda items. I think next on the agenda is other business. Is there other business, Madam Interim Secretary?
There sure is. We have a few more slides to go over with you, including the capital budget and some legislative updates as well. So there are more numbers to come. It's quite a big budget. So we appreciate the Commission's patience and engagement. Well, we'll turn it over to Dan Schuster to talk a bit about the capital budget.
Thank you, Elena. Good morning to everybody. Dan Schuster. I'm going to be talking very briefly regarding the capital budget. probably heard me say before that during the budget process each year, there's not too much surprising that happens on the capital side, at least in terms of authorized funds for the most immediate upcoming fiscal year. And that's because projects and the funding for those projects are planned 5 years at a time in the Capital Improvement Plan, or CIP. As you may recall, back in October, I came to the commission to present regarding our recommendations for the upcoming fiscal year for the capital budget. And at that time, we recommended that funding be provided to continue projects that were planned in the CIP. And that's essentially what happened. When the governor's budget came out in January, he provided enough funds to continue those projects. And the Assembly did approve those funds, and we're able to also find a few additional dollars, about $27 million, to fund a few additional projects that are considered legislative priorities. And so, as you can see on this chart, the final enacted budget for the FY27 capital is a little bit over $461 million, which I should say is in addition to all of the funds that my colleagues just talked about previously. The other issue that came out of the capital side this year on the budget is a new report that is required for us to submit on the JCR, and that is regarding ongoing community college projects and the statuses and expenditures thereof. And it is information that we certainly track on our own for our own purposes, and are happy to share that with the Assembly. Megan Music will be talking a little bit more about the JCR reports in a moment, but before I turn it over to you, I'll pause again here, see if anybody has any questions on the capital side.
Doesn't look like there are any questions. Thank you.
Very good. I'll turn it over to Megan.
Thank you. So, as mentioned throughout our presentation so far, we have referenced JCR reports. So this slide here highlights one of the most important shifts from this legislative session.
Can you just explain what JCR is? I really dislike it.
Absolutely.
I know, but the other
Yes.
yeah.
No worries. So JCR stands for the Joint Chairman's Report. This is a very extensive report that comes out of the budget committees after the budget is passed. It is comprised of different budget amendments for each agency and each budget category, and also includes essentially reports that the budget committees or the DLS analysts proposed and put forth and got passed through the budget to then get added on and then become requirements of the agency. And just for reference, these are different than our legislative mandated reports, which I'm going to talk about in a few slides, because JCR typically are just a one-time report. They are associated with the budget and come out of budget actions. Legislative mandated reports are different in the sense of they are usually tied to a piece of legislation and involved in either reporting on what that legislation is doing or the impacts, or a study, which then usually provides recommendations or an analysis of what that piece of legislation did. So that is the difference between a JCR, which is our Joint Chairman's reports, and legislative mandated reports. So I'm going to touch on both, but starting with Joint Chairman's tying into all of the budget information that has just been shared. During this budget cycle, we have had 10 additional JCR reports added within the agency. So this is important because this is showing it's not just volume. 4 of these reports are tied directly to funding restrictions. As a result, approximately $1.4 million in funds are being restricted until certain reporting requirements are met. A quick overview of what those 4 report subject matters are and how much they're restricting. We have a report on the GA Grant and Teaching Fellows of Maryland Scholarship. This will be due this year, and it's restricting $250,000. We have a report on actions to address audit findings. This is due this year, and it's restricting $100,000. We have a report on the post-secondary outcomes for NGS senior students. This is also due this year, restricting $50,000. And then finally, a report on the financial details of grants, scholarships, and loan assistance repayment programs within OSFA. This is also due this year, and this is restricting $1 million of our funds. So again, these reports are not just informational reports anymore. They now are having direct fiscal consequences. So last session, in comparison, MHEC had 5 JCR reports, none of which restricted funding. This year, that number has almost doubled to 9. So we have 8 operational. We have 1 that Dan had mentioned, which is capital. And then we do have 1 report that falls under MHEC, but it is not authored by MHEC. And this is a report by the Department of Legislative Services. And it is a report on the potential and feasibility of relocating OSFA out of MHEC. So that is authored by the Department of Legislative Services. So this does represent a shift in how JCRs are now being leveraged and used within the actual budget process. So the overall takeaway here is that there's both an increase in the volume and a significant increase in impact. And this shift is going to have real implications for our staffing capacity, timelines, and compliance moving forward. And this next slide shifts from the budget to key legislative highlights from this session. So MHEC introduced 1 departmental bill this session. It was cross-filed, meaning we had both a House bill and a Senate bill. They were both exactly the same bill. This legislation delayed the decentralization of the Guaranteed Access Grant Program and has the new implementation timeline for 2029 to 2030. The goal here was to ensure that we had operational readiness and stability before formal transition. And this is also to avoid disruption with student financial aid delivery. The MHEC team is already working on implementation and partnering with our institutions to make sure we are moving forward towards decentralization within our delayed timeline. So HB 231 and SB 207 passed unanimously through both committees and both of the chambers, so both the House and the Senate. It was signed into law on April 14th of 2026 and has the effect date of July 1 of this year. So this does in fact reflect our strong legislative alignment and support for our student-centered implementation timeline. And this is a really great example of how MHEC works collaboratively with the Maryland General Assembly to balance our policy goals with operational realities. Moving on to the next slide. This is going to provide a broader look at legislative activity beyond our departmental bill. This is including overall tracking, outcomes, and engagement. So this session, we tracked approximately 90 bills that all had direct impacts on higher ed or state government. This reflects the breadth of policy areas that intersected with our actual work. Of those 90, about 40 bills did pass. Our team is continuing to conduct an in-depth fiscal and policy analysis to understand implementation and impact. And we do remain actively engaged throughout the session to provide favorable testimony and letters of information. And this consists of the same updates I had been giving over the past couple of months to the commission on how we're doing with legislative session. Again, we still did not oppose any legislation. That reflects a collaborative and solution-oriented approach within the agency. And we also worked very closely with our segmental partners on a weekly basis to make sure we were staying aligned and coordinated on key issues related to higher ed. So a number of bills, which I have a few just here on the slide, are worth noting for their direct impact on students, institutions, and workforce alignment. These include bills that have expansion tuition benefits, financial aid program changes, and workforce-focused initiatives and new access pathways. These bills do make changes to OSFA scholarships or grants by adding grants or expanding existing programs without increasing their funding streams. They also are creating reporting requirements or requirements of MHEC without additional funding to support our personnel. So overall, this session does demonstrate that we've had strong alignment, and engagement with our partners, and a broad legislative portfolio that does require continued coordination within the agency, the MGA, and our external stakeholders to move into implementation. Moving into the next slide, we then switch. So as I mentioned when I was talking about JCRs, you have JCRs and then you have legislative mandated reports. So prior to the 2026 session, MHEC was already responsible for 47 legislative mandated reports. Going through legislative session, we have those 10 JCR reports that were tied to the budget. But in addition to that, there are 5 new legislative mandated reports based on legislation that has passed this session. So together, that is 15 new reporting requirements from a single session. And that's just to provide the reporting landscape that it's expanding both budget-driven and within legislative requirements. And these new additions bring MHEC's total reporting obligations to 62. So we have 62 reporting obligations after this legislative session. This does show that we have a meaningful increase in the workload, our coordination, and compliance demands across the agency. Some of these reports are annual, some of these reports are biannual, and some are just one time. But in total, we have now 62. And we do want to highlight that this does reinforce the need for ongoing coordination to meet both legislative expectations and our funding related requirements. And with that, it concludes the presentation on our 2026 budget and legislative updates. I will pause here for questions, and if not, I will turn it back over to our Madam Secretary.
Any questions? Vice Chair Agu.
Megan, thanks so much for the update. Less a question, but more just an information ask for the future. I think let me separate them, the thoughts on the audit reports on the additional reports per se. But I think for the commission going forward, even a quick slide kind of for our upcoming meetings for any reports that are attached to funding that are outstanding would be helpful for us to know. I think that this is really, really helpful. It doesn't have to be long, but kind of here's what's outstanding, here's how much funding, and then also just a projected date of completion. That would be helpful, one, so we can stay abreast, particularly because I know it's going to impact funding and operations.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Good suggestion. Any other questions? Commissioner Williams.
Yes, thank you for the report. Quick question. Why do you think this is happening? And like you've had, additional joint chairman reports, additional legislative reports. It's a ton of additional activity for one legislative session. So I'm interested in the why behind that from your perspective. And then secondly, with the DLS report suggestion on OFSA and their suggestion about moving it, I'd like some discussion about what that means and where that's coming from and where it might head. That's a very significant, recommendation.
Absolutely. So I will say the Maryland General Assembly, this legislative session, came in very hard, not just for our agency, but for agencies across the board. They were taking fine-tooth combs through every agency's budget, through every agency's actions, and working towards how do we hold our agencies accountable, essentially, which is within their wheelhouse to do as oversight of state agencies. And so across the board, we have seen significant increase in JCRs and legislative mandated reports. The JCRs for us are pieces of where the legislature is restricting funds to say, we need to see this report before we could say you can have this money, essentially. And it's because they want access to that information. And this legislative session, they really emphasized on withholding funds to be able to get reports, because it's their way of holding an agency accountable to make sure the report is submitted. So that's kind of the first piece of answering your question of like, why do we see the influx? I think it's also important here to highlight that we're moving into an election year. And so the legislature, there's a difference in how they engage with one another, how they engage with the overall politics of the bills that they're pushing. And around this time is when we see, like I said, they come in much more enforceful in the sense of making sure that they can go back to their constituents and say, we are holding individuals accountable for the work that they're doing. To the second piece of your question, it's, I think, a conversation, quite frankly, that has been in the Maryland General Assembly for years now in relation to OSFA. I'm going to leave it open for my colleagues here, but I do want to state that there was a report a few years ago with kind of a similar study of where else essentially could the Office of Student Financial Assistance be housed. And I think with this legislative session, again, this is partly a power move and trying to figure out, is this going to be an opportunity for them to say, well, we're going to shift it to a different agency, or we're going to have it as a standalone agency. What is significant about this report is that even though the Department of Legislative Services is going to be authoring it, they are required to work in collaboration with the Maryland Higher Education Commission and the segments across the state to come up with a concise report that basically provides different options and essentially what are the pros and cons to those. And at the end of the day, what would be the recommendation if OSFA was no longer housed in MHEC? Where would it go? And what is the feasibility of that? But I would say it's not necessarily a new idea being put forth. I think this is just their way of saying, we have eyes on you and we're going to try to move something if you're not being held accountable.
Thanks so much, Megan, for your insights, and Commissioner Williams for your question and observation. So there's a few things that I would like to add for the group's consideration. One, Megan's exactly right, that this is what feels like, and perhaps it's my training in political science and policy, a dynamic engagement between the executive branch and the General Assembly. And so we had 10 budget hearings this year where the General Assembly did indicate areas where they would like to see additional information, further accountability, and transparency. I take that as useful information, both as a deputy secretary and now as an interim secretary, of areas of focus. Audits, for example, are something that the General Assembly was quite attentive to this past year. And I'm grateful to Governor Moore and his administration for also making sure that agencies within the executive branch took audits coming out of OLA seriously. And I'll give you an example of something that we've been working on at the agency. And again, you heard that some of the funding is withheld because we need to provide a report on progress that we've made with audits. Under Sam Durai-Pandian, you heard from him earlier, he's one of our budget directors. So there is an audit report that came out in 2025. There were 7 findings, 4 of them were repeat findings. One of those findings was from 2001. And so under Sam's leadership, for the first time, MHEC has addressed that finding. So I think the General Assembly is signaling to us, and so is the governor, that we can't continue to have repeat audit findings. It's something that agencies must take seriously and take actions to remediate those. And I can tell you, we have a Tiger team that's meeting later today and will be meeting weekly to ensure that we are addressing those audit findings. That's just an example of the type of reporting requirements. And frankly, I think that's a healthy dialogue between the executive branch and the General Assembly, again, to demonstrate that we are being good fiscal stewards of taxpayer funding. Related to the Office of Student Financial Assistance, I'll make 2 comments. The first is, again, Megan's right. The General Assembly has had quite an interest in the location of OSFA for some time. My understanding is that OSFA, a couple decades ago, was an independent agency before it was integrated into the Maryland Higher Education Commission. It was a separate office in Annapolis, and then about 20 or so years ago, they brought it into MHEC. For as many states as there are in the country, there are different operational models between an MHEC and an OSFA. There are some states that don't have an MHEC equivalent and simply have an OSFA. There are some that have an MHEC and an OSFA. There are some that have the Maryland model where OSFA is embedded in MHEC. There are some where an MHEC is embedded in a broader body that coordinates birth to post-secondary and workforce education. So again, it's an interesting question to ask about where it should live. I would argue that we have the expertise to support that work moving forward. And as much as we are looking at whether or not OSFA should live at MHEC, there is also the question of, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, is our effectiveness in distributing and streamlining financial aid to the neediest students hindered by the way that the financial aid portfolio is currently designed, with 28 different programs with different criteria and frankly a small staff. There's $860 million that is managed by an agency of 88. So that's like $1 million a person, or more than that, sorry, 10 million a person. So that is definitely a consideration. We're also, the last thing I'll say about Austin, one of the things that excites me the most is that the team has been operating a legacy system that is over 20 years old. The Maryland College Access processing system, again, is an antiquated system. It's a legacy system. It was built in a very unique kind of way that also makes it very difficult to alter, effectively communicate with our students, effectively communicate with the General Assembly. So it's imperative that we launch the Maryland Student Information System, the new system, which we're a bit delayed, but the delay was caused because of procurement and bid protests and the complicated bureaucratic nature of ensuring that you're being good stewards of those fiscal resources. But once we have that in place, and we've been working closely with the General Assembly and getting their input and what they would like to see in that system, we believe that we'll be able to more effectively manage those financial aid resources. But again, we'll constantly be constrained by the fact that that portfolio is overly complicated. The chair mentioned earlier, imagine being a first generation student trying to figure out what program you're going to apply for, what funding you're eligible for, what documentation needs to be verified, what role does the institution play in verifying that you should receive those dollars. So again, an interesting question. We have thoughts. We certainly welcome the thoughts of the commission as well, and we'll be sure to coordinate as we work closely with the Department of Legislative Services as they complete that report.
One quick follow-up question, and Megan, this is for you. I just want to understand exactly the question that the report is dealing with. Is the report basically saying, how would you move OSFA and its feasibility, or is it asking for a recommendation on if OSFA should be moved? I know that sounds very similar, but they're actually very different. Which one is it?
So it is a study to evaluate if OSFA were to move, what do those options look like? So it is to go through and evaluate. It states whether it becomes as examples within the JCR language. Is it to be a standalone, stay within MHEC and what that could look like, or be within, for example, another state agency? So those were the three examples provided within the JCR report.
Got it. The only thing I'll say is, I think, how I say this, the best argument for OSFA to stay where it is kind of just unquestioned operational excellence. Just that obviates this entire conversation. I know that I think everything that's been said is correct in terms of the things that make it hard to administer financial aid, and I'm looking at our chair, who is the expert here, so on and so forth. I think it's easiest to make those arguments from a position of operational excellence. And again, I know how hard Al Dorset and everyone works there. I think candidly, we may even have to do more so that this org is in a position of strength to basically make the bigger arguments that I think everyone at MHEC, and I think I agree with, which are that I think OSWA is best here. So I just wanted to say that out loud. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you all. Thanks for the great questions. Thanks for the presentation. It is certainly a sobering presentation. The agency has a lot of work ahead of it, but I think they are very much focused on the task at hand. I think the interim secretary has assembled the Tiger team, as she's mentioned. They're working consistently on these reports. There are many more reports than usual, and they had a lot of reports to start with. So I like the vice chair's suggestion of a monthly update, particularly on the reports that are tied to funding being withheld. So if we could see that next time, that would be great. Any other questions or comments on this topic of legislation, budget, finances? All right.
Madam Chair, if I may, just
Yes.
want to once again thank the team. They're small but mighty, and I think Commissioner Howe said it best. Like, the depth of today's presentation really does reflect a lot of behind the scenes work. Vice Chair Agu, I appreciate your point on highlighting the operational excellence of our agency. And again, just want to reiterate that under the Moore-Miller administration, we take fiscal stewardship quite seriously. And so that is something that we are committed to doing, is to making sure that we also update the commission on the fiscal and legislative realities that our agency faces. So please do consider this the new operational base. My ultimate goal is to make sure that you as the commission have both the broad context and the granular insights in order to make sure that you can govern with confidence. So again, really appreciate it, and please do expect more of this from the agency as we move forward. And I appreciate the recommendation to have regular updates on the progress that we're making with our reports that are tied to funding restrictions. Thank you.
Commissioner Howe?
I just want to say that at a time when I read, although I don't know whether the number's correct or not, but when the legislature meets next year, if there is a projected 2.5 billion shortfall going to occur in the budget, and it is more imperative than ever, and I compliment all the work that's being done to document the funding that is acquired, where it goes, who's getting it. And it's going to become more and more and more important, I think, as time goes on, because legislators have to have a budget, and they're going to be looking for places to cut dollars. And we certainly do not want it to be with the Maryland Higher Education Commission. So again, I compliment all the work. I don't even understand half of what you talk about, I have to tell you, but I'm sure it's all important, and you're doing a great job at it, and yay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Howe. All right, now I jumped the gun a moment before. We're now up to other business. Is there other business? Interim Secretary Kira Slavanis, are there other items on your agenda? No.
You know, I think we've presented a series of comprehensive updates. I hope they've been useful to the team, but that is and to the commission. That is it from us, Madam Chair.
Wonderful. And I'm told by Ms. Nguyen that there are no public comments. So the next item is adjournment. Before we adjourn, I just want to remind the commission that we have our next meeting the last Wednesday in May, which is May 27th. We also have a workshop session that I know some of you aren't able to attend, but I hope many of you are, on May 21st. So please check your email about that. And I look forward to seeing most of you twice next month. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I can't imagine there are any nays or abstentions. All right, everybody. Have a great day. The motion passes. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have